The first thing I saw that morning wasn't the flood. It was a lawsuit. A process server stood ankle deep in muddy water outside my ranch gate, holding out a stack of papers that claimed I owed the HOA $2.8 million for intentionally flooding the subdivision. Behind him, the HOA president stood pointing at the raging river, yelling loud enough for every camera crew on scene to catch it. He did this. Reporters swung their cameras toward me. Neighbors glared from behind police tape. Somebody in the crowd shouted, "You ruined our homes." I looked out at the river swallowing half the valley, then back down at the lawsuit in my hands. There was just one problem with all of it. I didn't own that river. I never had. And within 30 days, the people pointing fingers at me were going to find out the flood wasn't the worst disaster they created that year. My name is Wade Harrison. My family has ranched along the Elk River in western Montana for almost 90 years. Long before any luxury homes showed up, everyone in the county understood one simple fact. That river belonged to the state. It had its own floodplain, and every spring it rose exactly where nature intended it to. 5 years earlier, when developers pitched a 400-home subdivision right next to the river, county engineers warned them flat out, this land floods. The developers brought in expensive consultants who promised retaining walls and decorative drainage ponds would handle it. The county approved the project anyway. Every home sold within 18 months. Then the HOA took over, and their new president, Melissa Grant, decided the riverbank needed better views. She had contractors rip out hundreds of native cottonwood trees along the water because they block homeowners' scenery. Environmental experts warned her those trees held the soil in place. She ignored them. Then she approved decorative landscaping that paved right over several natural drainage channels. Experts objected again. She waved it off again. I sat through one of her board meetings and quietly told her, "You're fighting the river." She laughed in my face. The river will do what we tell it. I never forgot those words. 8 months later, the biggest spring storm in 20 years rolled through the valley. Rain fell for 3 straight days while snow melted out of the mountains faster than anyone expected. The river rose exactly where the government's flood maps said it would. But this time, something was different. The HOA's new landscaping had blocked the water from reaching its natural overflow channels. So instead of spreading out the way it always had, the floodwater slammed straight into the subdivision. Within hours, streets turned into rivers, garages filled with mud. 6 feet of floodwater buried the landscaping that had started all of this. Emergency crews evacuated dozens of families in the middle of the night. The next morning, Melissa called a press conference. Instead of taking any responsibility, she pointed straight at my ranch. It was Harrison. She claimed my irrigation ditches had somehow redirected the flood toward the neighborhood. By sunset, local news stations were repeating it word for word. 2 days later, the lawsuit landed on my property, demanding $2.8 million in damages for allegedly altering the river without permission. I wasn't worried because I knew something they didn't. Every irrigation structure on my ranch had been inspected by the state annually for decades. Every permit, every maintenance report, every engineering survey was documented down to the last page. My attorney requested every environmental study the HOA had received before construction ever started. They fought us on it for weeks, until a judge finally ordered them to hand everything over. What came back changed the entire case. Buried inside thousands of pages was an environmental report completed before a single home had been built. It warned in plain language that removing riverbank vegetation and filling natural drainage channels would dramatically increase flood damage during major storms. Every board member had received a copy. Melissa had personally signed the final page acknowledging the risk, and then ignored it completely. It got worse from there. Investigators found internal emails where one board member asked whether the drainage plan met state safety recommendations. Melissa's answer was right there in writing. If we follow every environmental rule, we'll lose 20 waterfront lots. Another email instructed contractors to clear additional trees without pulling the required permits. The lawsuit against me collapsed almost overnight, but the fallout for the HOA was just getting started. State environmental investigators opened their own review and satellite images, Engineering surveys and drone footage all confirmed the same thing. Protected drainage paths had been deliberately filled in during landscaping projects the HOA itself had approved. The river hadn't changed. The neighborhood had. County officials concluded my ranch played no role in the flooding whatsoever. The real cause was the HOA's own unauthorized changes to the land. Homeowners were furious once the truth came out. Many of them had trusted this board when they bought their homes, only to learn the warnings had been buried for years. An emergency election wiped out the entire board within weeks. Multiple homeowners went on to sue former directors directly for hiding known flood risks and approving changes that never should have happened. Months later, I stood beside that same river while engineers replanted hundreds of native trees along the bank. A young reporter asked if I was angry about being blamed for something I never did. I looked out at the water, moving quietly through the valley like it always had. The river never lied. I told her. People did. The lawsuit against me was dismissed. The county officially cleared my ranch of any responsibility. The HOA ended up spending millions defending claims they'd manufactured against an innocent neighbor, all while the real damage traced straight back to their own decisions. And everyone in that valley walked away with the same lesson my grandfather taught me as a boy. You can argue with your neighbors. You can even argue with the law. But you can never argue with nature and expect to come out ahead.